This happened when I was 7. I was living in upstate New York with my 2 slightly older brothers. We would often hang out down the street at our friend's house. Our friend was named Ben, and he was around our age. One late afternoon, my brothers and I went to Ben's for pizza and a movie. We spent most of the day there, so by the time we were done, it was pretty late, so it was dark outside when we decided to head home. When we left, we saw a woman standing across the street from Ben's house. We were a little weirded out, but it seemed like she was minding her own business. At this point, we were still in the driveway, about to leave when this lady looks right at us and sprints in our direction. Ben's mom always had her car parked in the driveway, so we sort of book it back around the car to try to hide and get away. She continued to try to follow us around the vehicle, and she kept trying to switch which direction she was running around the car in an attempt to get us. The whole time she was laughing manically like a witch, saying how she wanted to catch us. We were freaked out, of course. She only stopped when Ben's mom came out of the house and asked what was going on after she heard the commotion of the cackling witch lady chasing after us. The laughing lady sprinted off and was never seen again. Ben's mom walked us home that night. This is a long story, so bear with me. It's all true, and I'm happy I'm still alive. It was in the summer of 1997. I was a grad student in Northern California, from abroad. Not an immigrant then, just a foreigner getting a degree and planning to go back to my old country afterwards. At the time, my girlfriend was still back home abroad, since we both expected me to return to Europe after graduation, and maybe, though unspoken at the time, possibly get married after. So she visited for her summer vacation. Let's do a car trip down to Southern California. Let's take the coastal highway down to South Cali, see Santa Barbara, Monterey, LA, Venice Beach, San Diego, and even drive down to Baja. The whole tourist enchilada for 2 20-somethings visiting oh-so-cool California. My then girlfriend, and this description of her physical features is entirely serving as preparation for what's to come that day. So F off, perverts. She had perfectly shaped thin legs, curved body, long hair, and was generally speaking quite attractive. She was also borderline paranoid, which I knew already, and she had already given me plenty of headaches when she had dragged me into conflict situations where she demanded I defend her, like a man, when the situations had been actually completely provoked by her. Hence my tendencies not to immediately jump on the thought of getting married. Frankly, I wasn't sure about the marriage part, but I knew that then, and went along with her demands and plans as usual that day. We were nonetheless in love and all that, but me perhaps a little less than her. So we drive down to South Cali from the Bay Area, and eventually my old rusty but beloved clunky 80s convertible I had cheaply acquired took us along the beach road to a motel in San Diego. Let's pick a motel near the beach, she said, so we can just jump out and swim in the morning. Let's check in, get dinner somewhere, and drive around town to get a feel. Okay, what she wants goes. She pointed to a motel along the coastal road. There's one after another, but she knew what she wanted, so she chose. This is the one, she said. Let's park and see. The vacancy sign was lit. The parking spots in the motel courtyard were all but empty. I drove in and parked. I had driven the whole day and she could see that I was tired. I'll drive later, she said sweetly. I was grateful. She goes into the motel counter while they unload our suitcases. As I'm coming in with the suitcases to the reception, she is talking to a youngish, tall, dark, blonde guy behind the counter. Not bad looking. He is looking her up and down with small eyes, clearly checking her out. Looks at me, then turns around, grabs a key from the board and says, I got the perfect room for you. He leads us up the stairs. The motel built like a chain of rooms lined up, front all looking towards the ocean, doors towards the motel parking lot courtyard. He takes us up to the room, smack in the middle of the long building, second floor. The entire motel seems empty. I'm tired, but why this room? I'm wondering. Schlepping the luggage. Why not downstairs, or at least on one of the ends? The view is the same everywhere. As we enter, I notice a smaller door next to our motel room door, which says, Service personnel only. Our room is right next to it, built narrow, but big beds and a bathroom. And on the left wall, just across from the beds, a giant mirror, which was on the wall that connected to the service room. The guy nods and leaves us to it. As soon as we're alone in the room and he has left, I turn to my girlfriend and say, "Don't you think this is weird?" She says, "What?" I point to the mirror and then take a closer look. Yep, it is built fixed into the wall, not hanging on the wall. I find this extra creepy. She says, "Don't be paranoid." Okay, maybe. I gotta get something out of the car anyway. So I step outside, only to see Mr. Motel Room just stepping out of the service room, locking it behind himself, and heading downstairs. Once I was back up, I took a big textile blanket and hung it over the mirror. Maybe I'm paranoid now too, or maybe not. If he was a peeping Tom, he didn't get anything. We take a nap, and later, as we head out for some food and checking out the town, night is drawing near. The motel parking lot is now 2/3 full. We were early, good, girlfriend says. I feel foolish and swear to myself to be less paranoid. She usually is paranoid enough for the both of us. That mirror though, never mind. So we spend the evening having dinner, driving around, until finally we decide it's time to go back to the motel. It is dark and it's way before GPS, so I consult the map we have. I sit in the passenger seat, glad that she's driving, while I try to read the map of San Diego in the light of a feeble, teeny keychain light. We are driving roughly back in the right direction to the motel, somewhat parallel to the beach boulevard we need to be on, but I realize we might have gone too far. As I stare at the map in the dim light, she looks in the rearview mirror and suddenly says, "That van is following us." I look up, surely now that she's the one being paranoid. Behind us, one lane to the right, is an old, silvery, blue van, a bit run down, with darkened windows. "I swear," she says, "he's been behind us for 3 blocks at least, and took the same turns, and is not passing us even when I'm driving slowly." I look around. There is hardly any traffic in this direction. As we roll on, I seriously doubt her. My rational mind telling me that victims rarely even get picked randomly. I try to calm her down, look at the map again, and get an idea. "Look," I said, "we actually have to take a U-turn to get down into the lane that takes us back towards the beach boulevard with the motel." Looking down the road to the next traffic light a block away. "There is no cop here. Take an illegal U-turn at the next light. Then we'll see." She nods. I know she's a way better driver than me. She has at least 3 more years of driving experience with stick shift in narrow European streets, while I was just learning to drive in California. We approach the next traffic light, a clear, no U-turn hanging from the next light, that eerie silver-blue van behind us to the right, and the light turns red. And girlfriend, gone race car driver, puts the pedal way down, motor howling, and shoots over the red light in an illegal U-turn to go in the opposite direction. And the van? I kid you not, it sped up, shot into the lane behind us, and did the same thing, wheels screeching on the pavement. Then it accelerated full throttle to catch up, its lights glaring into our rearview mirror, blinding like hell. "Hit it, hit it, hit it," I mumbled, now panicking myself, and my girlfriend accelerates, the van behind us staying on our tail. We shoot down 2-3 blocks, the van right up on us. More cars join in our direction though. Behind us, the traffic gets denser and the lanes merge into one. Now the van is still behind us, but close behind the very creepy van are 3 or 4 more cars, all speeding, all pretty close to each other. We can see their lights. We are back on the boulevard where our motel is, 1-lane road, many fairly closely parked cars on our right, with just the occasional gap or entries to the parking lots. and a concrete barrier to our left. No room to go but forward. We were moving really fast, easily 60 miles per hour. For sure, way past the speed limit here, but so was everyone else. How did we shake this van? Surely we shouldn't lead them straight to our motel. My super driver girlfriend suddenly hits the brakes and veers to the right. The van had no choice. It cannot brake or it will get hit by the cars behind it, and it passes by on the left, immediately followed by 5 speeding cars tailing it, all in one fast line. While my girlfriend swoops the car perfectly in what feels like a tiny pigeonhole of a parking spot. "We can't stay here," I muttered, after we came to a stop and catching my breath, totally stunned by her skills. "I know," she says, and she hits the pedal again, shooting out into traffic. But now we are behind the van, safely at least, 8 or 9 cars behind it. They can't possibly know. Just 200 yards further down came our motel. She took a swing into the parking lot. We parked and rushed up to our motel room, the one with a creepy mirror. I looked back the whole time, whether anyone had seen us. Nothing, just a pleasant summer evening wind, the sound of traffic going by. I didn't sleep much that night, and neither did she. Just another tourist summer night in San Diego. Today, I think the thing that triggered the creeps in the van was, I had a rundown car with Northern California license plate, and they must have seen my girlfriend driving. They might not have even seen me, or if they did, just a silhouette. So they might have assumed that there was 1 or 2 women, lost, far from home, driving around at night. I hear San Diego is wonderful, I'm sure it is, but that entire day felt like an intro to a slasher movie. I'm an 18-year-old female. I was young when this happened, probably 9 or 10. Some of the details are a bit fuzzy. At the time, I definitely didn't find it to be a big deal. Only recently I've been thinking about it and realizing how creepy the whole thing was. My mom believes it's one of the scariest things to ever happen to her, and that she generally feared for our safety at the time. We were driving late one night, and it was just me, my mom, and my dad. Eventually, we had got a bit turned around. I think this was around the time iPhones were relatively newer to my family, and not the best quality. So my dad pulled into a bar to ask for directions. It's completely dark out, and he gets out of the car with it still running and goes inside. A couple guys are standing on the porch of the establishment, and they are eyeing me and my mom alone in the car. After a couple minutes, one of them comes out and seems to be coming towards our car, but goes into a truck next to us. He fiddles around with it for a few seconds. Then he gets out and makes it seem like he's going back on the porch with his buddies. Instead, he turns last second and sits in the driver's seat. He's clearly intoxicated. He's older, maybe 50s or 60s. The car is still running, mind you, and nothing is stopping him from doing something reckless, like changing gears. He starts talking to my mom, and it's clear that she's uncomfortable. He says something like, I just want to go for a ride. And my mom is nervously playing along, probably in an attempt to placate him, enough so he doesn't try anything. My mom mentions a couple times that my dad is just getting directions inside, and that he'll be back out any second. Eventually, the man gets out, and my mom locks the doors. His buddies are all laughing and continue staring at us. When my dad comes back out, the drunk guy stops my dad and says that he's just joking around with us. I know when my dad got back in the car, my mom was furious because she hadn't wanted to stop at the bar in the first place. He definitely didn't see it in the way she did. He took it as a harmless drunk guy, and that it was fine because nothing happened. Looking back, the situation had so much more potential to go wrong. Me and my mom didn't have anything to defend ourselves, and there was nothing from stopping him from driving off with the car with us. It's amazing the things we brush off at a young age, and only later realize how dangerous they could have been. After listening to a podcast that talked about this forum, I decided to share my story as well. Keep in mind that my friend and I, that I'm mentioning in the story, were only 12 when this occurred, and this was our first time that something like this happened to us. We were terrified. So this whole story begins when I was around 12 years old and takes place at a 2-story shopping center that is wall to wall with our local IKEA. My friend and I had been walking around for a couple hours, buying a few things and looking around in stores. We were tired and decided to take a break and sit down for a bit. We sat down by the entrance on these 2 soft chairs, with my friend sitting on the right. Behind me to my left was a bench. On this bench there was an old man just sitting there. He looked to be in his later 50s, early 60s, and at first I didn't think much of it. I was just thinking he had to rest his legs just like us, so I gave him a smile to be polite and didn't think much of it. I continued talking to my friend, who, like I mentioned before, sat to my right. Suddenly I get this feeling like someone's watching me. I then turned around to see that the man was staring at me with a large smile on his face. I get uncomfortable, and just as I'm about to turn to my friend and tell him that I want to leave, my stomach drops as the older man pointed at me. Then he slaps his lap, trying to symbolize like he wanted me to sit on his lap. I observed his movements and looked up to meet his face. He was now doing a certain movement with his tongue. I froze and my survival instincts kicked in and told me to run to find a security guard. I turned to my friend and said that there was a pedophile and that we needed to run. My friend turned to the old man and saw him doing the movement with his tongue towards me again. I saw how panic struck my friend's face, and we stood up and started to run through the crowd of the other shoppers, deeper into the shopping center. I turned my head back to see that the man was still observing us and was still doing the movement with his tongue. I shouted at my friend to run into the jewelry store in front of us. We tried to calm ourselves down, and by doing this, I told the female cashier that her hair was really pretty. We continued to run up to the upper floor to look for a security guard that could help us, but we couldn't find anyone. So we decided to walk over to the entrance. We were still on the upper floor, so we could have the high ground on the old man if he was still sitting on the bench. We looked over the railing to see if the man was still sitting on the bench, but he was gone. We had lost him. I was still standing in fear that we no longer knew where he was. My friend had then turned around and had seen him walking towards us further upstairs. She told me we ran downstairs and out the entrance. We didn't stop until we arrived to my grandparents' place. We ran to my grandparents' apartment that is relatively close to the shopping center. When inside, we told my grandparents what happened. And to this day, I still fear what could have happened if the older man had caught up to us. Just a quick backstory. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, and everyone who's lived there knows that it's very busy and noisy all day. The buses, traffic, and businesses everywhere. But at night it gets very quiet and very eerie at times. This story is about an incident that happened to me when I was 15 and I got my first job at McDonald's. This gives me chills every time I think about it. So anyway, I was 15 and just got hired at McDonald's down the street from where I lived. It was perfect because I could get to and from work without worrying about getting a ride from my parents. While working there, I met some kids my age that I became close with. Unfortunately, they weren't the greatest of kids. They were very rebellious. They would clown around at work, act disrespectful to customers, typical 90s punks. I slowly started to become like them. I began disrespecting my parents, which was totally not like me. But I was always the nerd that didn't have many friends, so I wanted to fit in. Side note, I was very sheltered growing up and didn't really get around much because my parents were very overprotective. One night around 10 p.m., I finished watching Monday Night Raw and went downstairs to grab something to eat. I opened the fridge and heard my dad's footsteps. He wore those slippers that tapped loudly on the tile floor. "Chris, I've asked you all day to take out the trash. They come tomorrow, so do it now." Now normally I would have taken it out the first time he asked me, but now I was getting a little older and became a smartass and didn't think it should be my responsibility anymore. "I work now and go to school, you take it out," I replied. My dad's eyes got wide as I've never spoken to him like that before. He leaned in and said softly, As long as you live here, you will help out. Now take out the trash or leave. I called his bluff, and rather than just simply taking out the trash, I rebelled like the dumbass teen I was. Fine, I'll leave. If you're gonna kick me out for that, don't bother looking for me. I'm done living in this stupid house, I said as I opened the door and slammed it. I walked towards the McDonald's to see if any of my friends were there, and they weren't, just the maintenance guy finishing up cleaning. Of course, of all nights, it was raining, so I had to find somewhere to stay dry. There was this bridge with the overpass a little ways down the street, so I started walking towards it. The whole time I was regretting what I did and wished I just took out the damn trash. I was finally getting to the bridge and I climbed the hill to a little section in the corner to stay out of view. I remember in school learning to go here in case of a tornado, so I knew it was safe. I patiently and stubbornly waited, assuming my parents would call the cops, which in my mind would show me that they cared. An hour goes by, nothing, no sirens, no cars were even on the road. It was getting pretty cold out, but I promised myself I wouldn't give in. I crossed my arms over my legs and fell asleep. I woke up violently from a semi wailing on its horn over the overpass. I looked all around and was confused. How long was I out here for? I looked towards the McDonald's and saw an old man in a gray suit sitting at the bus stop. It was weird. He was sitting still, facing forward. I assumed it must be like 5 a.m. since he was waiting for the bus. I stood up, very upset that my parents never tried to find me, and began to walk to the bus stop. Now I'm a very outgoing person, and I trust my gut. As I walked closer to the old guy, I didn't get any negative vibes. He slowly turned his head as I approached and looked at me and smiled. Not a creepy or uncomfortable smile, a genuine, peaceful smile. I smiled back and decided instead of going home, maybe I can vent to this guy and get some advice. I asked if he minded if I sat down. He smiled again and gestured towards the seat. Is everything okay? He said with concern. Yeah, I just ran away from home. My parents don't respect me anymore and how much I do all day. I began telling him the story, and I noticed as time went by, he was becoming more and more anxious, and his smile began turning into a frown. He began to start breathing loud and cut me off dead sentence and said, "You need to go home now," with a stern voice. I was confused. I figured maybe his bus was coming soon, and he wanted to say that before he left. I looked down in frustration because that's not what I wanted to hear. I suddenly felt a strong grasp on my arm. He grabbed me and looked at me dead in the eyes. His eyes were terrifying at this point, bloodshot and wide, and I was shaking in fear, totally thrown off guard by his complete switch in persona. He was literally shaking like he was afraid of something. He kept looking down the street and then back into my eyes. "You need to go home now," he screamed at me. At this point, the guy started to scare me, and I stood up and nodded, and he let go of my arm. Nervously, I started walking back to my house. I figured my mom was already up making coffee, so my plan of sneaking back into the house and hiding in the basement was not going to happen. Just to see if she would be up, I looked at my watch. It was 1:30 a.m. My heart stopped and my throat became dry. Why was this man at the bus stop at 1:30 a.m. when the buses aren't running? I turned back towards him to look at him. He was gone. Now I was scared, confused. I needed to get home. I used my spare key to get into the house, opened the door quietly, and everyone was asleep. I slowly opened the basement door and made my way downstairs to the storage area in the back. I buried myself under bags of clothes so they wouldn't find me. Figured I could get some sleep. The image of the guy kept popping up in my head, and I was so freaked out. It just made no sense. Just then I heard loud sirens passing by. Not just one, multiple bursts of sirens coming every 10 seconds or so. I smiled, thinking I won. My parents had called the police to look for me. My plan worked, and now I would make them worry until the morning and regret kicking me out. I made myself a little bed and covered myself up to stay hidden and fell asleep. I woke up to hear my mother sobbing upstairs. I looked outside the little basement window and saw daylight, so I figured I would go upstairs to get my apology. I opened the basement door and walked into the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the dining room table with her head in her arms. She immediately looked up at me and gasped. She stood up and ran over to me and hugged me so tight. "I thought you were dead," she muffled into my jacket. I slowly pulled away and looked at her, confused. "Why would you think that?" I asked. What she said next sent chills throughout my entire body. She said last night around 1:40 a.m., a drunk driver crashed into the bus stop in front of the McDonald's. It was completely destroyed. I started breathing heavily and realized that the man saved my life. If he didn't tell me to leave when he did, I'd be sitting there and would have been killed. So many emotions were running through me and I didn't know how to handle it. So I just hugged my mother and immediately began to cry. I apologized and realized I missed the old me. I almost got myself killed for my own stubborn stupidity. I dropped those friends and got a new crowd at school, and from that point on, anytime the trash was full, I just took it out. I don't know who or what was at the bus stop, but I thank you for saving my life. Whether it was just a lucky coincidence or right place, right time kind of thing. But no matter what, all I know is, if it wasn't for him telling me to go home, I would have been sitting at that bench for the rest of the night. When two of my friends who were juniors at college back in 2018, we decided to sneak into Playland Park in Rye, New York. One of the friends of mine grew up in Rye and had done it many times before. So while I was nervous about getting arrested for trespassing, I felt a bit reassured that the park wasn't really monitored at night. At 1 a.m. we drove and parked our car next to the large fence in an attempt to scale it. It was rather difficult and required us to step on each other's hands to get over, which gave me intense anxiety about how we were planning to get all three of us back over the fence on our way out. After both of my friends got over the fence, I attempted to chicken out and wait in the car, but finally decided to join. After several minutes of struggling, I made it over the fence on my own, and we began walking up while lighting up a joint. It was pitch black at this point. Almost all the lights in the park were off. We approached the water flume ride, which went up about 150 feet and then dropped into a steep slope. Alongside the ride there was a staircase for technicians and employees, which my friend decided to climb for a better view. At this point I chickened out and decided to stay at the bottom out of fear of heights. As they ascended the stairs, I looked across the park and noticed something very strange. We weren't alone in the park. Several hundred feet from us was a pond with what appeared to be a small boat or raft, and 4 people riding inside with flashlights attached to their head. What was even stranger was the fact that there were 2 dark figures swimming in the pond looking for something underneath the water. I could barely make out the silhouettes of these figures, but after a few minutes I noticed that they could see us and began mobilizing their boats in our direction. I frantically started whisper screaming to my friends, who were all the way at the top of the water ride and could barely hear me. At this point, the boat had reached the land and the little lights on their helmets were heading in our direction fast. My friends finally raced down the stairs and we began sprinting as fast as we could down the boardwalk that was dimly lit and back towards the way we came from. As we sprinted down the long, straight boardwalk, I realized that we were completely visible and started to accept the reality of being caught and arrested. We somehow rounded the corner, got back to the fence, and climbed over it safely. We hopped into our cars and dipped out immediately. I couldn't believe we didn't get caught, as the figures chasing us were no more than a few hundred feet away from us when they spotted us. Still to this day, I wonder what the hell those people were doing swimming in a pond in an amusement park at 1:30 in the morning. My friend had told me that kids had drowned in that pond before, making me wonder if they were searching for a body. I googled any article I could find to no avail. My friends and I are still totally puzzled about this experience and can't think of a very logical explanation. Just thinking about it now gives me the chills. My girlfriend told me that 2 weeks ago she was waiting in line at a convenience store with her friend in Chinatown, New York City, and this large, dapper-looking man came over to them. He complimented her coat. and commented on how expensive it must be. She said, "Thank you," and they chatted for a little longer. The man explained how his suit was just a shitty Brooks Brothers suit, but she noticed he had all sorts of expensive jewelry on. When my girlfriend and her friend explained that they were students, he kept making assumptions about how they must be rich and their parents are paying for everything. My girlfriend was starting to feel uncomfortable and began trying to distance herself from him. He asked them if they had jobs, and they told him no, as they were students. After this, he went on to tell them what he does for a living, without being asked. He said, "I do all sorts of odd jobs, this and that. I mainly have these guys that work for me though. I find them off the streets and feed them and give them a place to stay. I'm waiting to meet up with them now." He referred to them as his minions, which made something at first seeming wholesome very unsettling all of a sudden. He then told them that he had just had his wallet stolen and needed $400 for something. I don't remember the reason. He told them that he could pay them back in a week, but he needed the money that night. My girlfriend politely declined and at this point was very uncomfortable. She started walking towards the door to leave and said, "Nice to meet you and good luck." They both walked outside and sat on a bench just outside the convenience store. As they were sitting and discussing this strange interaction, they saw the man exit and stand outside about 10 feet away, waiting for a few minutes, looking at his phone. He then met up with the other two men and they chatted for a few minutes, then walked in the other direction, and the other two men walked into the store and started holding it up with knives. Absolutely shocked and frozen, they both watched as the cashier put her hands up, then emptied out the cash register. The two men ran out of the store in the same direction as the man in the suit walked. They were both about to call the police, but saw the cashier already was. They waited at the bench until two police cars showed up, and they walked in to tell the officers what they had just witnessed and tried to help identify the robbers and the men they had just met. I wonder if this is a common thing in terms of organized crime, to pay homeless people to rob or commit crimes. So this happened around March 2021. I was 15 and my sister was 17. My sister wanted to take some shrooms because it was nice and sunny out. I decided to tag along and just hang out with her. My sister and I went across the street because it was a big grass trail that leads to another yard, plus our family members can see us from the windows. We live in a 2-story. The left side of our house, there was actually an alleyway that's made of gravel. We were just having a regular conversation, talking about random shit. My sister is sitting in front of me, which means my back is facing the house. All of a sudden I see a man who's just standing there, staring at me. Mind you, he's like 30 to 45 feet away from me, so the chance of him seeing us from there is low because the grass is pretty overgrown. You'd really have to look and walk back and forth. I'm watching him and he starts walking towards us. It freaked me out the way he noticed me. I had seen him walking and looking forward like any other person on a walk, but he randomly stopped and he looked right at me. Like, bro, how the fuck? I look at my sister and I'm like, hey, we have to go like right now. She was so confused because she was obviously tripping. I said, there's a man coming over here. We have to go. He starts hiding behind a car that belongs to my neighbor. It's right in front of the tall grass trail. I could see his dirty ass dusty boots, so I knew for sure that he was waiting to do something. So now at this point, he is on the grass and we are already in our gate. I ran upstairs to my aunt's room because there's a window on the left side of our house. We watched him walk down the alleyway and I noticed he had something in his hand. It was a knife. He turned around and walked towards the direction he came from. I've never seen him since. I always wonder what could have happened. Scary world. I was 19 at the time and I was waiting on the docks for a friend. I was alone and smoking quietly. a man approached me asking me for a cigarette. I gave it to him. When we finished smoking, he approached me. He started hugging me and I pushed him away. I said to him, "I gave you a cigarette. I didn't ask you to touch me. Leave me alone, you make me feel uncomfortable." He kept getting closer as I pushed him away. He stuck to my ear and started whispering sexually, directly into my ear. It paralyzed me mentally. I pushed him away, but he wouldn't let go. I told him to leave, but he didn't listen to me. He was saying sexual things about me. I ended up freaking out and telling him I was going to kill him or kick him if he came near me again. He kept going. Those 30 minutes were really long and he was really chasing me around the docks. There were 2 or 3 people nearby, but no one intervened to stop him. This all stopped when my friend got to the train. Sometimes I hear his whispers in my ear and I don't like it. It's a traumatic experience. This happened about 5 years ago when I was attending college in a small, rural town. I'm a female. I was 21 at the time, and I lived in a duplex with 2 roommates in a neighborhood. We had a house on both sides of us. We never really saw our neighbors much or talked to them until it was maybe 3 or 4 a.m. I was just getting home from my boyfriend's house. I pull to the driveway and start walking up to the door when I hear, "Help me. Please help me." At first, I was startled and bolted towards the door, but then I realized that someone might actually need help. So I slowly walked back out front and noticed an older woman laying in my neighbor's yard. She calls out to me again, "Please help me. I think I broke my hip. I fell off the porch." I walk over to her and ask if I can call an ambulance. She says, "No. Can you please just go inside and get me Dr. Jones?" I'm just going to preface this by saying I know my next actions are not smart, but I wasn't thinking clearly at the time. So I walk inside the house and start calling out for Dr. Jones. While inside, I noticed the open bedroom door with a light on and a mattress on the floor, which I assumed was the woman's room. I walk farther back into the house calling out for Dr. Jones, and eventually he comes out of the back bedroom. He looks just as startled as I was. I tell him the situation and he follows me outside and helps her. They thank me and I go into my house. The rest of the time I lived there, I never saw either of them again. Still one of the weirdest things that's happened to me. When I was 19, I was hanging out with my then best friend at her and her boyfriend's apartment. Things were getting super weird there after we smoked some weed, and we were just sitting on the couch. I don't remember my interactions, I was totally zoned out, but I remember ending up in their bedroom where my best friend and her boyfriend were trying to talk me into a threesome. Me being in a long-term and serious relationship with my now husband at the time, I was not okay with the idea, and I was really uncomfortable. I left and was crying while driving. I was literally sobbing, so I pulled into a gas station to calm down, because I wasn't in the best condition to drive. I had an old Santa Fe, so my doors didn't all lock. As I was crying, someone hopped into my car with a bag of things and just stared at me for what felt like 5 minutes. Then was like, "Oh, sorry," and jumped out of the car and then went into another car. I was left confused and now crying for a totally different reason, because this stranger who I'm thinking is about to rob me or worse is staring at me while I'm slightly staring at them, wondering what the fuck I'm supposed to do in this situation, and also really uncomfortable for a whole number of reasons. Probably more funny than creepy, but creepy and uncomfortable for me in the moment.
When I was around 7 years old, my parents rented out our basement to a young couple. Things went smoothly for the first couple of months for the most part, save for the occasional loud party here or there. They were nice enough and would even leave their door open for my siblings and I to wander in and out of and use their basketballs, badminton rackets, and that kind of thing whenever they were home. They would let us come and go as we pleased, although we didn't do it so very often because my parents weren't comfortable with the idea, of course. As time went on, they started getting a bit out of hand, throwing loud parties until all hours of the night and disturbing the neighbors. Sketchy people coming in and out. My parents suspected they were growing marijuana in the basement, as the house constantly smelled like weed all throughout. My parents did end up finding a plant being grown in the closet under a lamp, and they evicted them immediately. This was when weed wasn't legal at the time. A few years went by until a family member who works in corrections came over one day. They began talking to my mom about our former tenants. They asked us if we ever knew where they ended up, and she said she didn't. The family member then told us that a man was brought into the facility that they worked at, who looked and sounded familiar because they weren't able to place him. They suspected that the man may be our ex-tenant, who was actually being held on charges of sexual assault and murder, but they aren't sure if it was him or not. Eventually, my mom was able to confirm the identity of the man as being our ex-tenant. He was arrested for assaulting and murdering his ex-girlfriend with his father. My parents didn't tell us this until years later, but it was pretty wild news considering how many times he had invited my siblings and I without hesitation into the basement whenever we were out playing in the yard. I was about 13 years old, lived in a quiet rural lake community. My parents, aunt and uncle were going away for the weekend, so my cousin, who was 15, stayed over at my house for the weekend. He brought over his Xbox and a bunch of games, and we stayed up all night playing and chilling in my room. My room was small with a single twin bed, so we ended up sleeping downstairs on the set of couches in the finished basement. I get woken up by my husky at around 8 a.m. She was acting like she needed to go out, but this was strange for her to do. I rubbed my eyes, still half asleep, and started up the stairs to let her out. When I grabbed the doorknob, to my surprise, the door pulled right open. As groggy and dumb as I was, I think to myself, weird, the knob must be broken. I open the door, clip my dog onto her lead, but she won't go out. I coax her out, annoyed because I only got a couple of hours sleep, and when I turn to go back inside, I notice the jam is completely destroyed. That's when everything hit me. I have no idea what to do. My cousin is still asleep in the basement. I don't have a cell phone. Are they still in my house? I quietly listen for any kind of movement. Then I go back down to the basement and wake my cousin up. We stupidly decide to go up and look through the house. Thank God it was empty. It was also empty of all of our video games, movies, and valuables, and that kind of thing. I call 911, then my parents. Police arrive, but they don't do much of anything except say, "Tough luck." It took me a few hours to settle down, when I finally realized that the fact that this person or people watched me while I slept. Had we stayed in a small room with a creaky door, I almost certainly would have woken up and faced the intruders. My life could be very different. It still gives me the chills 16 years later. This encounter happened to a friend and a coworker of mine about 15 years ago in a suburb of Los Angeles, California. My friend, who we'll call Jody, lived with her parents and older brother in a house in a pretty nice neighborhood. They didn't really worry about crime or break-ins and that kind of thing. One night though, at about 2 a.m., Jody was woken up by loud knocking at the front door. She jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway, where her parents and brother were coming out of their own rooms. The knocking, now a pounding, continued. "Stay here," her father said, and he made his way toward the door. All of a sudden, there came a muffled male voice shouting, "Help me, help me." Jody and her mom grabbed each other in fear, and her dad looked out the peephole. "There's nobody there," he said. He looked out the front window, where you could see part of the front door and porch. He still didn't see anyone. He walked back towards his family when the loud knocking began again, this time even more frantic. Again, a voice shouted, "Help, help me." Jody's dad went to the phone and called 911, and while he was talking to the operator, Her brother had walked up to the front of the house. The pounding was still going on, getting faster and faster until it was a constant banging. Help me, help me, oh God, help me. Jody, in tears of fright by now, looked over at her brother, who was standing in the family room, which was located to the left of the front door. His face was white. He made an arm gesture for them to join him. Jody, her mom and dad, hurried into the family room, where they immediately realized why her brother's face had gone pale. The pounding and shouting was coming from underneath the family room floor. The police arrived minutes later, and it turned out that some guy in his 20s had gotten all out of his mind on crack that night. He had somehow made his way into the opening of the crawl space under the house, located underneath the family room window. They never found out exactly what his intentions were, but they assume he was trying to find a way into the house to rob it. He then got disoriented because he was so high, and then he freaked out, hence the pounding and shouting. The story gave me goosebumps the first time she told it to me. So 2 summers ago, I was hanging out with my boyfriend Adam and our friend Luke. We were planning on going to another friend's house, but had some time to kill before they were off of work. Luke mentions kind of suddenly that he forgot that his coworker Tim gave him money earlier to pick up weed for him, and that he was supposed to go drop it off at Tim's house. First of all, thanks for mentioning that before you got in my car, but I didn't bitch too much and just asked for the address. The GPS directed me to a higher-end gated community on the other side of town. From working at a place that dispatches delivery drivers to this community all the time, I know that you usually need some kind of code or something to get in, but the guard at the front just buzzed us through with nothing more than a puzzled look when we said we were heading to the Smith house. Weird, but okay, whatever. Then we get to the house. All the lights are off. There are no cars in the driveway. We triple-check the address and go to ring the doorbell. No answer. We ring again and still no answer. Luke is trying to call Tim. Adam is trying to call one of the guys Tim said he was hanging out with. I'm peering into the windows, starting to get a bit weirded out. That's when I notice there's no furniture within sight of the front window. The entryway has no coat rack or table. The kitchen at the end of the hall has no table. The sitting room off to the side didn't have any couches or anything. There were pictures hanging on the walls, but they appear to be mostly landscapes or paintings. No family pictures or anything personal. By this time, both the boys announced that no one had answered their calls or messages. I say I think we should leave, and that Luke can give Tim his shit at work the next day. Before I can even start my car though, Tim messages Adam, not the person he sent on this errand by the way, and he says, "Hey, just go around the back and come in through the basement window when you get here." What? I tell them that's the sketchiest thing I've ever heard, that we should leave. But they insist it's fine, and that's just how Tim sneaks his friends in and out of the house if he doesn't want to wake his dad up. This still makes no sense to me, considering it's like 8 p.m. Neither of them actually hang out with Tim outside of work, but off we go around the house. At the back of the house, we reach one of those light shafts that are common in lots of houses with basements, the ones that let light down to the underground windows and look kinda like a drainage pipe. Basically, my boyfriend drops down this hole and knocks on the window. Tim answers it and says he'll be out in a minute. He then promptly closes the window. Adam climbs back out of the hole and the 3 of us are standing there waiting. So now, we have 3 adults standing in the dark backyard of an empty house in a gated community, trying to drop off weed to my friend's coworker. I don't like this at all, but after a minute, Tim and another boy I don't know emerge from the hole. They make the swap and then Tim reaches out to shake my hand and says, "Hey, Billy needs a ride home. You got him, right?" Again, what? Before I can argue, Adam and Luke say it won't be a problem and offer to give me gas money if I need it. So the 4 of us pile back into my car. I got a second out of earshot to ask Adam who the hell this kid was. He informs me that Billy's older brothers were 2 friends of mine at the time. That did ease my mind a bit. Trying to avoid awkward silence, I asked him in the car how his brothers are doing. He simply said, "What?" I tried to clarify. "You know, Ken and Ben. I knew them in high school. Isn't Ken in England or somewhere?" And again he responded shortly, "Oh, yeah, okay." So much for that. But he did direct me back out of the gated community and through the regular neighborhoods, asking to be dropped off at a house a few miles away. While I was never close enough with his brothers to go to their house, I'm relatively positive that they lived in an entirely different neighborhood. And to add to the creep factor, in the 2 years since, I've gone to Tim's house several times, in an entirely different town. I asked Adam about it one day, and the only explanation I got was that Tim's dad lived in the gated community, but Tim lives with his mother most of the time. I have no idea what was really going on in that house, but I don't think I want to know. So a couple of days ago, I woke up around 4:20 to our fire alarm going off in our house. This is not a normal fire alarm either. It's a piercing, extremely loud one that even our neighbors can hear in their house 4 houses down. So I bolted awake and woke up my boyfriend to let him know as well. I went to the panel downstairs to turn it off, and I saw that it said there was smoke in the basement. Okay, no big deal. It's happened once before, and it was mostly just a false alarm that time. So I put in the code to turn it off. This all took about 5 minutes because my sleep-deprived brain couldn't remember it. So I had to look it up on my phone. I know I need to check the basement to make sure everything was okay. I grabbed a kitchen knife just in case, and because I'm a slightly paranoid person, plus being startled awake already had me on edge. So there are 2 ways to get to the basement. You can go outside and go through the cellar doors, and an additional locked door to get in, or take the elevator down in the house. Our landlord, whom we live with, put in the elevator when he bought it for his family that were in wheelchairs. It's basically the size of a closet, and has a small gate that you slide closed for a door. So I took the elevator to the basement, opened the gate, and when I went to open the door to the basement, I turned the knob, but it felt like someone was holding onto it on the other side so it wouldn't turn. I immediately let go, slammed the gate to the elevator shut, and pressed to go to the 2nd floor where our bedroom is. When I get up there, my boyfriend sees me and asks me what's wrong. I'm literally standing there with wide eyes in my bathrobe, clutching a huge knife to my chest. I told him what happened. He immediately gets up and says to stay there. Thankfully, the fire department arrived a minute later, so he and our landlord went to go talk to them. They went down to the basement, both through the elevator and through the cellar, but there was no one down there. However, our back gate was open, and we know it was closed before we had taken the trash out earlier. They didn't find anything, and the next day we went through together and made sure everything was locked. But now I'm just dealing with the fact of what could have happened if I had tried to force the door open, or if the person down there hadn't thought to grab it. I've never been great at being concise, but sharing this is helping me feel a little less anxious. A few years ago, my mother asked if I would go to her house and let the exterminator in. She told me not to leave him alone and to follow him around the house and ask questions. I wasn't sure what kind of questions she meant, but sure, I can open a door and follow someone around the house and annoy them. So the exterminator arrives and I follow him from room to room, asking whatever questions came to mind. Stuff like, have you been getting a lot of calls for stink bugs? Did you ever need to get a rabies shot? What's the largest thing you ever had to exterminate? For an hour, I followed this man around while he patiently answered my ridiculous questions. He said he enjoyed our conversation. 2 days later, I'm watching the news, and I see that the body of a local doctor was found bound in her basement. Her corpse was lit on fire. The very next day, the news flashes a photo of the man arrested for the murder. He looks very familiar to me, and then I get a full-body chill. It turns out the doctor was having an issue with mice and called an exterminator. The same one my mother called. The day after I asked this man, "What's the largest thing you ever had to exterminate?" he apparently snapped because the doctor was rude. She asked too many questions and talked down to him. Many years ago, I got my first bachelor apartment. It was a basement unit in a 2-story walk-up on the edge of my town's campus. So naturally, it was an eclectic mix of wealth and poverty. I was somewhat closer to the latter. This place was tiny, with a mattress on the floor against one wall. I could lie on the floor, feet against the edge of my mattress, and touch the far wall with my fingertips. So there wasn't much space. The kitchenette was to the right of the apartment door, and there was a tiny bathroom in the back. One night, at around 4 a.m., I heard growling, and because my apartment was so small and I was so close to the apartment door, and because it was so dark, it sounded like the growling was inside of my apartment. It sounded like there was an angry, hurt animal growling on the other side of my living room, and in the pitch black, that was truly terrifying. I lay there under my blankets, terrified. The growling went on for almost 30 minutes and would get louder and more angry, then taper off a bit, then get louder, angrier, and higher pitched, like a wail or a shriek, and then stop. Finally, I heard the scratching on my door and the growling stopped. There was nobody in my apartment. Never was. It was my next-door neighbor, and apparently she believed she was possessed. She did this a few more times. She would lie on the floor outside my apartment door in the hallway, out of sight from my peephole so I couldn't see her. I could only hear her growling and speaking something that wasn't English. It was always well into the night. I had no phone, and ours were the only apartments in the basement, as the rest of it was for the furnace and water heaters and storage. So when I wanted to go out, I had to pass her apartment, which started becoming a bad time. Every time I needed to leave home, it got to the point where I had to tiptoe past her door, because if she heard me, she would rush to her front door and start banging on it, shrieking and cursing until I was far enough away that I could not hear her. I spoke with the landlord about it, and he said she was fine. She was a lovely, quiet woman who mostly kept to herself. Of course, because we were the only tenants on that floor, nobody else heard what was going on, so it was her word against mine. About a month after speaking with the landlord about her, she set fire to her apartment cooking toast. She just put bread on the burner and forgot about it and set a small fire. Nobody was badly hurt. The building was evacuated and she went to the hospital with smoke inhalation, but she was released the next day. When they went in to assess the damage, they discovered that she'd written on every square inch of her apartment walls in small, neatly written cursive handwriting, vaguely religious scripture-style verses, apparently in an attempt to keep the demons contained. I moved out at the end of that month and never looked back. I heard through a friend that she was diagnosed with a severe schizophrenic disorder. She was put on a heavy course of medication to deal with it. To this day, I wouldn't know her if I passed her in the street. I never once saw the woman who became feral and laying on the ground shrieking outside my apartment door. I only heard her, and she scared the living shit out of me. So this happened a few months ago. I'm a sophomore in college and was traveling down to my hometown over break. I was having some relationship issues with my stepmom, so I didn't want to stay at my dad's house the night I arrived at my hometown. So I phoned a friend of mine from high school and asked if I could stay at his place. I knew from social media that he was still in town, and I have stayed at his place before, so I knew there would be a place for me to stay if they would allow it. My friend, who we'll call Z, seemed like a pretty normal guy. We weren't best friends or anything, but we got pretty close by the time we graduated. We would occasionally text or hang out if I was in town and catch up, reminisce on the times we spent in orchestra or in English class. When I called, he seemed extremely enthusiastic. Z's a normally upbeat guy, but this time it seemed like he was getting a brand new car. I didn't think about it at the time. He said I could sleep in the guest room, so I headed over. When I got to his house, He was just as excited as he was on the phone. He was bringing up stuff to do, like getting high and watching weird movies or playing video games. Z's parents weren't home, so he really wanted the opportunity to smoke. I was pretty tired from the drive, but since we rarely see each other, I thought a bit of bonding couldn't hurt. We played Smash Bros, smoked some weed, and just chatted for hours. It was longer than I wanted, but I was having fun, so whatever, right? By the time it was getting late, at around 2 a.m., he started asking some pretty weird questions, like if I ever wondered what it was like to kill someone, or if I thought anyone would miss me if I was gone. This, along with some pretty normal questions, like if I had a boyfriend or how my parents are doing, or if I'm making any friends at school, gave me such a weird feeling. I was confused in the moment, but it didn't hit me until after that Z could be assessing me for something bad. The weirdness of it all made me just want to go to bed. We stopped the game and both went into the basement where his room and the guest room were. We say goodnight. I go to my room and get ready for bed. I'm having trouble sleeping, just insomnia that I've had for a while, so I stay awake for around an hour until I hear some movement outside my room. The walls were pretty thin, so I could hear footsteps walking past my door and up the stairs to the main floor, then back down quickly after. What struck me as odd was that I didn't hear the basement door open. It creaks when it opens. The light didn't turn on, so I was confused what Z was doing. I heard him go back to his room, but I had this odd feeling just ever since I met him this night. He seemed a lot different than he's ever been. I decided to look him up on social media and Google to see anything out of the ordinary. Everything seemed normal, until I found his Tumblr. It was linked to his inactive Twitter account that I found on my Twitter contact list. His Tumblr was, well, disturbing. There were graphic drawings of mutilated bodies of humans and animals, links to suspicious-looking websites that I didn't dare click on, posts and stories about murdering, cannibalism, and torture. There were photos of guns, knives, and axes, which after looking closely, were all taken in his bedroom. The last post, around a week prior, was a text post from the account, saying he wished he could find someone easy to kill like a homeless person. I was immediately filled with dread. I knew he was going to do something. He must have gone up the stairs to lock the door. I packed all my things, and luckily I packed lightly. I then opened a small window at the top of the bedroom's wall. I started desperately climbing through, and as I was pulling my legs through, he opened the door. It was dark, but the streetlight illuminated enough for me to see he was carrying something long and skinny, so it was probably a knife. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. I just turned around, hopped in my car, and drove as fast as I could to my dad's house. I immediately blocked him everywhere and reported his Tumblr account, but not before telling the police. They said they couldn't do anything as the guns were registered under his dad, and he hasn't actually done anything yet. Nevertheless, I told my other high school friends not to hang out with Z anymore. Ever since then, I've been creeped out whenever I meet new people. Just the realization that someone I knew so well could underneath be this person who could hurt me so bad, who could kill me. I don't know what you're doing now, Z. I'm not sure I even want to know, but I hope you're getting help. In 2019, me, my boyfriend, my best friend and her partner, stayed at an Airbnb in Sandusky, Ohio for a convention. There were several red flags about the place, but it was much cheaper than a hotel near the convention hall, so we opted for there. The first red flag happened as soon as we arrived. The owner greeted us and made a point to tell us that his house was directly next door, as in, if there weren't any trees, he would have been able to see into the windows of where we were staying. Okay, so he had a few houses on his property. No big deal, right? Wrong. It only got worse from here. Per instruction, we were forbidden to go into the basement under any circumstances, unless there was a tornado. Being the curious young adults we are, We opened the door anyway, and we were going to investigate. We stopped in our tracks as soon as we saw the direction the stairs were facing, directly towards the owner's home. In the darkness, there was a faint electronic glow. We quickly shut the door and barricaded it with luggage. Again, the owner's home was so close, there could have easily been something connecting his house to the basement. A little weirded out at this point, we went and looked at the rest of the house. It was a nice and spacious place with a narrow staircase to the second floor, where our bedrooms would be. We selected our rooms and began to unwind after the long drive. In my boyfriend and I's room, there was a single random sprinkler in the middle of the ceiling. It looked out of place. We were tired from the trip, so I didn't think much of it back then, but looking back now, there's a high chance it was a hidden camera. Things only got weirder from here. We were gone most of the day at the convention, and when we returned, one of the outside doors that was definitely locked was unlocked, and it was slightly ajar. My friends and I collectively shared a look of panic and closed and locked the door. My best friend's partner suggested that maybe the owner needed to get something out of there while we were gone, and it's possible he didn't close the door completely on the way out. We made sure all of our things were still there, and then we soon forgot about it because we discovered something more pressing. The locks on both bedroom doors were now ineffective. We told ourselves that they were already like that, and we just didn't notice it, but I'm not sure if I believe that. On our second to last night, my boyfriend and I were both restless over what had been happening at the Airbnb and the day's activities, so we decided to try to find something to watch on TV to take our minds off of it. We were flipping through the channels of the TV, when suddenly we came across a Windows 10 lock screen, and no computer in sight. I opened the cabinets and looked around trying to find a computer. The dress that the TV was on was too heavy to move to look behind, but seeing where the wires were positioned, they could have very well gone through the wall and into the basement. We were too frightened to see the basement for ourselves to confirm or deny our suspicions of surveillance, and the owner's interference, and who knows what else. Needless to say, we left as quickly as possible the last day there, and we did not look back. In 2007, when I was 12 years old, my family and I took a trip to Key Biscayne, Florida, with some of my cousins and family friends. Naturally, while at the resort, my cousins and I would all hang out at the kids' club, where there were always a bunch of kids to hang out with, epic chicken fingers and ranch dressing, and fun games for us to play. There was a director of the kids' club who watched us and facilitated all the activities. His name was Dan. In retrospect, Dan was a major fucking creep. He was around 40 years old, super tall and skinny, and was balding badly. The worst part is that sometimes he had us call him Dan the Animal Man. For a side note, these sort of memories leave me in awe of how naive and blinded to danger I was as a kid. If I ever met this guy now, I literally wouldn't want to get within a 5-foot radius of him. And there I was as a 12-year-old, thinking he rocked. Time is a wonderful thing. Anyhow, I digress. It was made clear to all of us that for unknown reasons, Dan was leaving the hotel in a week. None of this fazed me. On our last day at the hotel, I lost my cell phone. It was a bright blue chocolate cell phone. I quickly told my parents I couldn't find my phone, and considering this was already the second phone I lost that year, my mom yelled at me and told me if I didn't find the phone, I'd be grounded. I hurriedly ran around the hotel looking for my phone, and along my way I went to the kids' club to see if anyone had found it. The room that was typically bustling with kids and activity was eerily quiet and empty. Dan was sitting on a couch all by himself. "Hey Dan, did you by any chance see my phone?" I asked. Dan responded, "Yes, I found it and put it in the lost and found in the basement. Come with me." Thinking absolutely nothing of this, I mindlessly followed Dan as he led me around the back of the hotel. We walked for about 3 minutes and arrived at the foot of a stairwell going into the basement. We were standing at the back of the hotel, in a strange area, and no one else was in sight. "It's down here?" I asked, confused. I was staring down a long flight of stairs leading to absolute darkness. The walls were made of unpainted concrete. It looked no more than a storage area, let alone a basement with a lost and found. Dan nodded and held the door open for me, motioning for me to head down the steps. Something in my 12-year-old self suddenly woke up. I'm not sure if it was instinct, fear, or fucking luck, but I immediately knew I had to get the hell out of there. Before Dan could say or do anything, I blurted out, "Never mind, I think I left it with my mom," and I darted away from the stairwell and back to the hotel lobby. I was so shaken up because something about that situation didn't feel right. I knew he was going to hurt me, and as a kid who wore rose-colored glasses and was overly trusting of others, this really meant something. I tried to compose myself and figured I'd investigate a bit more. I walked up to the concierge of the hotel and asked them where the lost and found was, because I'd just lost my phone. The nice woman at the front desk told me that lost and found was right there, at their desk. She then asked me what kind of phone I lost, and after I told her it was a blue chocolate flip phone, she smiled and pulled it out of the box under her desk. "Someone turned it in here earlier," she said, and then she handed me my phone. "Wait, you're telling me that lost and found isn't in the basement?" I stammered. "No, sweetie. The hotel is under construction and the basement is just being rebuilt. There's no electricity down there or anything yet." This scared the absolute shit out of me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this man was dangerous. At the time I was sharing my hotel room with my cousin, and she was the only person I told. Considering she was 8 at the time, I think I really freaked her out. I'm now 26, and I think back to that moment. I wonder what would have happened if I went down in the basement with Dan the Animal Man. It truly feels like one of the most critical junctures of my entire life. I'm so happy I knew to get the hell out of there before it was too late. I recently contacted the hotel to inquire about past Kid Club employees named Dan from 2007, just to see if he's still around, or on a sex offenders list, or maybe in jail. I even told HR this whole story, but they still refused to give me any information about him. They sounded pretty sketchy about it. I will continue to do research